Ian, welcome to the show. Ian Bishop. Glad you could be here. I know I'm going to get to see you in about a week and a half or so.
I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, me too.
I'm looking forward to all the McCaffrey jokes.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. Christian McCaffrey.
I totally see it
Christian
now.
McCaffrey, dude. Seriously.
I mean, I've been told I look like Joe Montana. So.
Colin won't let it go.
I can't let it go once you see it.
Yeah, I see it. I don't know why you, I mean, that's something you should embrace.
Dude, seriously, it's a really good trait to have. Now, Ian and I have shared a lot of good conversations. He's, I'll let you get into it, but EOS or, executive coaching for lots of different businesses, very successful businesses. I'll let you, if you want to tell the companies. I don't know if that's something that you do or don't want to tell online, but some companies that everybody here would know with successful, not only just typical businesses, but also real estate investors, entrepreneurs, et cetera. So Ian, tell me a little bit about yourself, a little bit about your background, and we'll kind of start rolling from there, because you have a lot of great insight onto what makes businesses tick, the people that are involved in them, and just numerous other things that us entrepreneurs that are continuously lighting fires and setting things on fire often forget to deal with. So yeah, man, introduce yourself.
Yeah, well, I tell people that I build custom operating systems for businesses. And really all that means is I help people that have a runaway train, that have a ton of momentum, and they need somebody to put the guardrails on to help kind of capture that potential and keep the team and the business moving forward. So really where I come in is I help implement operations, operating systems. But what makes me a little bit different is I do it with revenue in mind. Like, I'm not just trying to create structure and systems and meetings just for the sake of operations. Being a business owner myself and having a background in that and growing and scaling businesses, like, we always just measured gross profit. And so it was the only metric we looked at. 90% of the staff was incentivized off of gross profit. And so for me, like, implementing any kind of operations without revenue being the target in mind just like doesn't make sense. And so that's what I do now. And I do it in a one-to-one capacity. And I also do an accelerator for businesses where they're like just trying to kind of get started and they have an operator in that seat, but that guy doesn't maybe necessarily know exactly what to do there. He's maybe more the guy that's ready to execute, and he's not necessarily the guy that's ready to build it. I come in and I know how to build it. So it's like, all right, the analogy I use often is like, as the business owner, you are the team principal for like a Formula One team, right? Like, you're the guy calling the shots, betting on the strategy, and you're going to need somebody who's going to build the race car. That's me. I come in, I build the race car, and then you're going to put your driver in the seat to go out and win races. And what a lot of business owners do is they find the driver that they know, like, and trust, but they give them a go-kart and expect them to go out and win races. And so we make sure that there's a kind of a clean handoff and that we're setting the operator up for success. So I work with a lot of COOs, director of operations, and really kind of help accelerate their learning curve. And then have kind of started to carve out a little niche in the real estate world, helping investors who get into the business for the lifestyle. And as they grow the business, it starts to hinder their lifestyle. And so they're very aware of the problem and they want to fix the problem.
I have no idea what you're talking about.
And so it kind of is just this accidental niche that I've carved out where I'm like, oh, this makes a lot of sense for these people. I had a background in EOS. I discovered EOS and it put words to a lot of what I had already done in some of my businesses. But when it came to the real estate investor, it fell short in a lot of areas. And so we kind of developed our own curriculum that we do in an accelerator format called REI Boss. And so it's the REI Business Operating Systems. So we don't teach anything about investing in real estate. We teach the business structure and systems that you need to have in place for you to be able to step out of the business and for it to still continue to generate revenue.
That's great.
That's awesome. I was a part of Vistage for years, and they kind of do an EOS type model. We also have a EOS type coach now. There's kind of variations to it, but basically following the same principles. What is something when you first go into some of these, growing businesses where they start adding on employees, they're really in this growth phase. What are some of the things that you key on, both people and process wise? And what are some things that, individuals listening and or us, Chris and I, should be thinking about as you go from, an entrepreneur, you're putting deals together, things are working, but you realize that if you stop going and if you stop performing, the business basically stops. What are some of those things that you're looking at and evaluating?
Yeah. So, the first thing we do is we try to extract the vision out of the business owner's head. It's like, what is the final destination? Where are we going? And really, why should your team care? Because that's going to help your people manage their people well, right? Kind of having that North Star. After that, we do a process audit. So we look at the core functions of the business in terms of what needs to get done in the business. And I don't care who you have currently or what they do. I want to orient based around what the business needs, not I have this guy who's really good at this. And so how do we create a position for him? I want to say the business needs this function to get done at this level. Now let's evaluate who does it, how many people do we need doing it, right? And how does that fit in? So first we do the process audit, and then we start to build out your org chart. And we kind of do a 3-phase approach with the org chart. We do kind of current state, where are you at right now? Future state, where do you want to be? So wherever you have the most clarity. So some business owners I work with are very big, audacious dreamers. They only talk in like 10 years out, in billions, and that's like how they see the future of where they're headed. Well, sometimes the team can't relate to that. So we have to kind of piece together like, okay, so what would that look like in 2 years? What would that look like in a year to set us up for that? But wherever you have the most clarity, we design an org chart at that stage. So we say, okay, if we were doing a billion 10 years from now, what does the team look like? And are there any ratios we can borrow from to be able to say, if we're doing this much in top line, that means we need this many people doing acquisitions, raising capital, if it's a real estate business, property managers, things like that. How many do we need if the portfolio is this size? And so we start to kind of reverse engineer what would the structure of the company need to look like. And then the third thing I do is I ask, if you were to buy your current business, but say it's across the country, like let's say you go and you buy it and it's on it's in Miami, Florida. You don't live down there, but it's the exact same size of business, but it was a family business. They're selling it and everybody's cashing out, leaving. But you have all of the, assets, supply chain, marketing, like everything's all in place. You just don't have any of the people. How would you structure it? Who would you hire? What seats would you put them in? And that kind of gives us step one of the roadmap to go from how do we go from where we're at right now to how we should probably actually look right now, to then start to move towards this is what we're going to look like 3 years, 5 years, 10 years out.
That's a great question.
I would start with the process first.
I was going through that in my head with our business. When you asked that question out loud, that hypothetical, I was already starting to figure that out in my head. That's a great question. It's a great way to elicit some thought process.
Yeah. And it really helps you like eliminate the people to where sometimes we cater to certain players on the team, and they could be really great players, but we start to build the business around one particular person or a couple people and not build it around the strategy that we're willing to bet on.
Yeah. So we've been victim of that. And I wouldn't say victim because I'm also going to ask the question if that's just a natural evolution of a business. Because at the beginning, departments are, maybe there's 2 departments for one individual. It's just the size of the company that's just taking on dual roles. But, molding people to their roles versus roles to the actual people that you have. What type of leniency do you give into that? Meaning that if you have somebody that's really strong there, but they have the capabilities, how do you do that when you're a smaller company and kind of find the right mix and balance? But also, like, as you scale, how do you start peeling away those responsibilities to set up those separate departments? Because that is incredibly, incredibly difficult. I mean, I think of so many times, okay, Sally's good at these 6 things. So we're going to have Sally do all 6 things. I hired her for this, but she's great at doing all these other things. And what I have found is, typically people can do a couple things, but you start adding too many and you really get diluted in some of the most critical areas. So I mean, just personally, I've found that because one, these really high achievers want to do more. Like, so it's like a check mark for them. So they're raising their hand. But then you start losing efficiencies in certain areas. So yeah, curious on, both the how do you grow with that and what type of accommodation, if any, do you allow in some of those scenarios?
Yeah. I mean, in the beginning, it's more valuable to have, the generalist, like gunslinger type. But I think it's a transition that I see where I call it professionalizing the business, where we go from having generalists to having specialists. And that actually, oftentimes it makes the leader's job a lot easier to hold people accountable and to actually manage people. Because if everybody's responsible for everything, then nobody's responsible for anything. And you get people that just end up doing this and going, well, I thought you were doing it. Well, I thought you were doing it. Right. And so it's really hard to build in accountability and say, like, this is the thing that you do. So I think that's a progression. It's not an overnight, flip the switch where you're just going to go from having generalist gunslingers to specialists. But I think at the end of the day, what you're trying to create is a leadership team. And I think there's a huge void in the marketplace of managers and leaders. I think it's a skill that is seriously lacking. And it's not being taught. It's not being taught in school. I think entrepreneurship has kind of thrown the baby out with the bathwater a little with anything that sounded corporate. And so management development, leaders, KPIs, accountability, it's like, it's all like corporate stuff. We don't need that. And now they're kind of starting to stagnate, or they hit a ceiling and they're like, man, I just can't figure out why we're not breaking through, or I can't figure out, why I can't hold more people accountable, or why, I'm maxing out on my number of direct reports. And it's like, well, remember that stuff that worked for all these billion-dollar corporations? There's probably some good stuff there we could borrow from.
Yeah. Sorry to interrupt you. I'm so glad you brought that up, because I went through that struggle. I came from the military and then corporate law firm and then corporate and then corporate. And then I get out and I'm like, I don't want to deal with meetings and all this bullshit. But then after we grew so quickly, it was like, this is the Wild West. Like, I miss a little bit of that corporate. And so we actually, with the implementation of Blake, who we're working with, the EOS system, like having our level 10s every week, we're not solving the world's problems, but everyone's on the same page. Everyone gets a chance to hear what's going on. They can answer questions right then and there. Like, there's so much synergy. And then, you have someone complaining and saying, I'm in real estate, I don't do corporate, and therefore I don't like meetings, and I can just live this free life. It's like, not if you're on a business. Like, it's really hard. But I went through that struggle because I never wanted to have any of those meetings. And you can do that when you're a solo dude, but it's really hard to build a business that way. That's awesome to hear that other people you've worked with have gone through that struggle.
Totally. And usually it's the opposite that ends up happening. They get to a point where they're doing a ton of meetings to compensate for poor communication and for poor information being passed around the team and keeping people on the same page. So they end up doing a bunch of one-on-ones and, hey, you got a minute, and it actually gets worse than if they had just implemented some basic structure to kind of keep everybody aligned. Yeah,
it seems like at least typical management, when you hear of management, at least in, corporate environments, what I have found is that it's usually somebody with a really good skill set that is proficient at their skill set that then gets promoted to management. But to your point, there's no real training on management/leadership. So they're severely lacking in there, and they may be very good at those task-oriented items, incredibly proficient. However, one, having the patience, two, being able to, pass down their knowledge, three, motivate, are very different skill sets that oftentimes are overlooked. So in this overall building of your business, you find these people with good skill sets. Is the goal then, at least how you look at it, are you trying to work on their leadership skills so that they can become effective managers? Or do you think managers don't need those specific skill sets?
No, I mean, this is one of the reasons that I've started to steer away from some of the EOS frameworks was, my background was in growing businesses. I come from automotive where that very same pattern occurs. You have somebody who's maybe a really great salesperson and you promote them to be the sales manager. It's a completely freaking different skill set if we look at like what is actually required, but yet we just keep doing it over and over. The thing that made us really successful was I think we were better at leadership development than anybody else in our space. And so when I discovered EOS, it put a lot of language to what I had been doing operationally to grow and scale the business. But where I felt it fell short was in leadership development, project management, and conversion or like selling cycles. And so like it'll talk about sales and marketing a little bit, but it doesn't really dive into sales cycles and how important that is to know timeframes and how you're measuring that on your scorecard to give you the leading indicators. And the leadership development's the other huge piece. Like leadership development isn't doing a one-on-one check-in with your people once a month. Like that's not the leadership development that's actually going to build the next generation of leaders in your business. And so, yeah, I think that piece is crucial to have if you want to develop managers and leaders. Like most people have no frickin' clue what that looks like or what that includes. And so, one of the things that we do in Ops Academy is the very first module is on how to manage yourself so that you can manage the business. And so you got to have that accountability with yourself before you can expect to have it with other people in the business. And there's a lot. I mean, there's a ton that goes into that, obviously, but I think that leadership piece is absolutely crucial if you're trying to grow the business.
Do you mind just briefly expanding on that topic of being able to manage yourself? I've never heard anybody say it. It makes a lot of sense to me, accountability, discipline, et cetera. But I'm guessing there's some other nuances. I'm just curious of kind of how you define that and some of the things that, myself and other individuals could start conceptualizing.
Yeah. So one of the things that we do is I created this calendar management tool where we evaluate where you're spending your time, what's the highest ROI. And so we look at it through the lens of how much time am I spending on income producing activities? How much time am I spending on, and those are divvied up into short term and long term. So what could collect cash in the next 30 days? And what is, maybe a more network type of task that, this could produce something in the next year, but we have to quantify it. Like what is the value of it? So then we can start to segment and say like, this is the highest priority. This is the highest ROI where I should be spending my time. And this works great for your team as well. The next piece we look at are what are the things I'm doing that only I can do? And again, this is where, we were talking earlier of like, I thought that was a badge of honor. The things that only I can do in the business is like, great. Now this is what makes me valuable to the company. Instead, what we want to do is we want to get things out of that box. And so the term is like, we don't want any black boxes. We don't want any secrets. And like back in the day, you had guys that viewed this as like job security. If there were things that only that you knew how to do, people had to come to them for the answers. We want to create the culture, the atmosphere where it's like, people are cross-trained. We're not like dependent on any one person for their information, whether it's how a process works in the business or it's some kind of, nuance around how we evaluate a deal or, insight that we're looking for. So what we want to do is shift stuff out of only I can do it and either get paid for it, or we want to move it to the next category, which is things that someone else could do. And so I literally just use green, yellow, red. And we use it to color code the calendar. And because it's easy to tell people like, hey, you're going to do a time audit and evaluate every 15 minutes. And nobody freaking does it. As great as it sounds, nobody has ever gone through and actually done that. Like the, 1% of 1% of 1% of freak.
It's hard.
Has actually gone back and evaluated every 15 minutes. Right. And there's a bias in that when you're evaluating every 15 minutes, you now start changing behavior.
Of course.
And so it's like, it's not a true indication of how the time's being spent. So we use this as just a look back. We go, hey, look back at your calendar. Anything that's income producing, mark it green. Anything that only you can do, mark it yellow. Anything that is something someone else could do, mark it red. And the goal is to minimize the yellow. I either want to get paid for it, or I want to start to train, record Loom videos, trainings, SOPs, cheat sheets, whatever I need to make it so that somebody else could do it. And once somebody else can do it, now I can start to actually create like a transactional commitment of, if I could free up this time. Well, because you were in Seattle, Dan Martell said it, where he was like, don't buy back your time until you know what you're going to do with it. It's a fatal flaw people mistake from his book, because they're like, oh, buy back my time, I'm just going to start doing it. But they don't actually assign what they're going to do with the time. So in this exercise, we say, okay, this stuff is in red. This is how much time it's taking. If I had this time back, what would I be doing with it that would produce income for the business? Now, you do have to have a prerequisite conversation of, are you currently overextended and we're just trying to get back to neutral? Because if that's the case, there isn't going to be an ROI we're going to pick up. But if we're currently at neutral and we're trying to optimize, then we should be able to make the transactional argument of, if I freed up these 10 hours, and this works for your employees, not just you, but if I were to free up these 10 hours and I can now spend these 10 hours doing this income producing activity, it would produce this much income. And now you can make a decision as a business owner of like, I'm going to make this trade-off because there's an arbitrage here of, I'm going to pick up this much in revenue by getting rid of these low dollar tasks. So managing yourself, the other one we do is we audit like your screen time. How much time are you freaking spending on Instagram? How much time are you spending scrolling? What time are you actually going to bed? What time are you actually waking up? How many times do you hit the snooze button? Like these little things that don't matter, but they do, right? Because how we do that stuff is how we do the other things in the business as well. And so when it comes to managing yourself, those are some of the conversations we have.
Yeah. What are some tools that you give to, so I've got two questions. Say you have an individual that's, you kind of mentioned, somebody that has a really high skill set in one of their areas, only they can do it. However, there's also the saying that sure, maybe it is a unique skill set, but you can probably train somebody or provide somebody to get up to 80% proficiency in that task. How do you work with those individuals that, to get them out of their own headspace of that only I can do that, when it's showing that it's creating a bottleneck through that process, meaning that maybe they still are in that role. However, there is definitely assistance that's needed to further accelerate that portion of the business.
Yeah. So I've literally had this conversation an hour ago with a guy. You got to evaluate the risk and the reward with some of that. There's certain stuff where 80% is fine, but there's other areas where it's like, this is too high stakes in terms of reward. It's too high stakes for us to just chance it to somebody else, or the risk is too high for us to chance it to somebody else. So like, I come from an automotive background, and one of the areas that's really hard to break into in automotive is the finance department. And this is the exact reason why, is because the risk and reward are too great in both directions. On the reward side, like you could double the value of a single transaction in 20 to 60 minutes. On the risk side, if you fat finger something, misspell something, sign on the wrong line, like you now don't have a contract, you have a worthless piece of paper. And so it's high risk and it's high reward. It's like, I'm not just going to chance that to somebody that wants to learn it or wants a shot. It's like, you got to have 1,000 reps practicing this before I'm ever going to sit you in front of a real life customer in a real life scenario.
You're talking about when you're going to sell me that $2,000 seal coat.
I mean,
from the finance department, right?
Discount. That would be the friends and family discount.
Oh man, lifetime warranty on my tires too, and the rim package. You want to throw that in?
Exactly.
Oh man, okay.
But yeah, that's where it's like, man, there's a lot of margin that you can pick up there, but there's also a lot of risk that if you screw something up, the whole transaction's worthless, and now you got an asset that's out on the road, and you can't cash the contract for it. And there's no recourse to have to track down that customer because you don't have a legally binding contract because you missed a signature.
That's nuts.
And so that's a scenario where it's like, yeah, I can't chance this to 80% good. So what you can do though is like, when you're training somebody like that, the way I explained it to this guy an hour ago is I said, the first thing that we did was we said, okay, well, let's just minimize all the risk. Let's make sure they get all the attention to detail stuff down so that we don't have the risk of them screwing something up. And now let's give them a little bit of leash to where maybe they can be the late night guy. They're the after hours guy so that I can go home at 8 o'clock at night because I've been here for 12 hours. So he's the late night guy, and he maybe gets an opportunity here or there to show me that he's paid attention to this, attention to detail. The contracts are tight, and we're just minimizing risk. We're not even focused on how do we capture potential, how do we capture reward yet. And so that might just be like the baby step. Like I compare it to if you're teaching a kid to drive a car, right? You don't just chuck them the keys. Your first thing you do is like, hey, let me show you how I do it. Let me watch you do it. Okay, now you go do it, right? It's kind of this like in broad strokes, kind of this 3-phased approach.
Yeah.
But it also takes place over like 6 months. It's not like in an afternoon, I'm saying, okay, watch me drive the car. Okay, you should be good. Hop in the front seat, right? Like there is a progression that happens here.
Do you utilize this ties together, but in that handoff, which Colin and I have been not the best at, but you know, we're on that speed train, just needing a little bit of handrails or guide rails, which is we're in a way better place now. But how do you make that? Have you ever utilized like VAs or outsourcing, or has that been a suggestion? Because some of the problem with growing or who, not how, and all this other stuff is that it's expensive to have employees, or it's expensive to have people do these things. And that's the hardest thing is you have a friend who can fix all of their own ACs themselves, but that's a waste of their time. But at the same breath, it's expensive. Like, how have you suggested either lighten the blow on the expenses? Are you VAs, employees? What do you suggest on that?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's something where it's like, you can't dabble in it. You have to commit to it. And within that, I think depending on what it is you want that person doing, there's some trade-offs. So I'm not a huge fan of VAs just because I feel like some of the extra effort sometimes that comes in terms of communication frequency, having to double check their work. And that just might be the nature of my business, but I just feel like it's not worth that trade-off. I would rather have somebody who, frankly, English is their first language. When I say, hey, this is what I need it to look like, this is, what I need done, that I'm not having to constantly come behind them and pick up the crumbs, because then it defeats the whole purpose. So I'm not a huge fan of it. If there's something where it's more like maybe data entry, smaller, like repetitive tasks, I could see wrapping my head around it. But I don't know, anything that revolves around like me having to communicate with them having to communicate with a customer, I feel like the risk reward maybe, or that trade-off isn't worth it. And so again, it comes back to like, do I want to try and go find the person that already knows how to do this? Do I want to bring on somebody who's eager to learn and train them how to do it? Right? Because obviously everybody wants the A player, but if you can't get the A player at the price you want, you either got to increase the price or you got to make some concessions in terms of what am I willing to teach?
Or what are you willing to give up? Like it's expensive to have that other hire. And so temporarily your bottom line will be lower. But if that frees up time for you to go out and make more money for the company, then it is a valid trade-off. And people have trouble digesting that as well. Yeah.
Like Hormozy talks about this where it's more versus better. So the idea is like, if you have 10, we call them salespeople. If you're in construction, it could be operators on heavy equipment. If it's property management, it could be leasing agents, collection agents, whatever. If we have 10 people doing that, and we have the output of all 10 people is 100%, we could hire on one more person so that we have 11. And now we have 110% compared to what we had previously. Okay. That's a more strategy. A better strategy is saying, how could I get my 10 people to become 11% better? And so now, and really sometimes like, how can I get my 10 people to become 10% better? Which is, how do I get each person to just be 1% better? That now total is also going to be 110%. And so the trade-off in terms of strategy is, do I want to do more or do I want to do better? And so I think a lot of times we lean into doing more, and we look at the quantity lever rather than the quality lever. And I think leaders are meant to create leverage. And I think leverage looks like, man, how do I have a 1% increase across the entire organization, and not just I'll just go hire another person to have input here.
Yeah. Do you think that's looked at as the easier route. It's easier to conceptualize. Hey, we have this core group. They're doing 100,000 in sales. We add on another person. We can do it another 10,000 without using the word brain damage, but without the brain damage of having to sit down and train and create better processes.
Yeah, I think it's easier to wrap your head around. I think it's short term, right? Because when we start to map out what's the organization look like 3 years from now, well, I can't just keep doing that. I can't have one person that manages 100 people. At some point, I'm going to have another leader. Where are they going to come from? Well, it's going to be through developing people in that in the better capacity, training them to become leaders, right? So I think short term, it's easier for people to wrap their heads around. A lot of times, case by case, sometimes you need an extra set of hands, right? If the idea is we're going to go from 2 to 3, well, that probably sounds a lot better because now I'm getting an extra set of hands in the business. Where it starts to hurt is when you don't have a plan or you don't have the people in place to manage those extra people. So that's usually the biggest trade-off I see is like, do you need the extra set of hands? Do you need the extra capacity? Or do we not have somebody to manage this person? Like which one is it?
In the real estate space, that we know some of your clients, the transition from automotive to real estate, what are some of the bigger lessons or aha moments you've seen real estate owners like Colin and I? What are some of those big lessons or big ahas? Because, automotive is a little different. I bet you'd surprise us all that there's a large amount of similarities, but, selfishly, what are some of the things that you're seeing in our position that is such a aha for us?
Yeah, man, I have scenarios every week where clients bring things up to me and I'm like, oh, this is just like this scenario in automotive. I know how to do this.
Yeah.
We have a mutual friend that does assisted living, and we were having a conversation around what it looks like to take on, I'm trying to think of the proper term. They don't call them tenants. I think they're called clients or something. There's a particular term they use in assisted living where it's not technically a tenant. But anyways, when they get relationally in that business, you get a lot of clients from other vendors who are doing, say, like in-home care, or from like a recruiting, not recruiting, but like a placement agency. And so what happens though is it's like, hey, I've got an easy one, an easy one, an easy one. And then I'm like, ooh, hey, I've got one that's, maybe hospice care or is a little bit more challenging. And so you can kind of start to negotiate like a bundle almost of like, hey, I'll take these 3, but you got to take this 4th one also. And in automotive, this is how you negotiate contracts. You're like, hey, I've got this 800 credit score. I've got this 800 credit score. I got this 750. Okay, now I got this one that's a little bumpy that I need some help on, but like it's going to work out. Like they had good cash down. It's a solid contract, but I'll send you these other 4. I need you to take this one as well. And so it's like this same scenario playing out where for me, it's like this Twilight Zone moment where I'm like, oh, I've done this before. Yeah. And so I get that every week, man. There's a ton of overlap that I didn't realize exist.
It's just that in automotive,
automotive is such a complicated, big business. There's so much in terms of product, service, people, like inventory, like everything is covered. So from a real estate perspective, like we just use different terms. You guys call it a buy box. We would call it our ideal lot, right? Like there's just different terminology in a lot of scenarios, but it's all the same stuff.
That's great. Well, what do you suggest to Colin and I about the most important thing? One thing that's really made a light bulb go off for me right now is the question you posed hypothetically earlier about if you were going to go buy this business or if you're going to start from scratch or buy this business, like what's the first hire? Like what's that person? And then do you have it now or can you cultivate it now? Like that, my mind's just been racing the last 25 minutes since you said that. So what are some other big, large nuggets to give us?
Man, I mean, related to that one, I think, now it's really popular to say, go hire the A player. Like buy a business, put an operator in place, let them build it for you. Like that's real like trendy right now. That's a luxury you have to be able to afford. a lot of people can't afford to do that when they're first getting started. Mm-hmm. And so what I always say is we want to build the business like a mountain, not like a volcano. So volcano shoots matter out of the top and just splatters it on top. Like, you're sprinkling executives across the company, versus a mountain is shifting from underneath and it's driving everything and everyone up. And so I think that's what good leadership development looks like in the business, is we're driving everybody up. And, kind of back to that same thing I said earlier of like, I thought being irreplaceable in the business was a badge of honor. Once I shifted to, man, and this is really a big mentality shift, you can get your employees to adopt it, where they're not trying to create job security, but instead they're saying, man, if I can find my replacement, I can move on to the next thing, and I can keep moving up to the next thing. And so you have to have a growing business that has opportunity for them to do so, and then tie that into that kind of a culture mentality with your people. They will then they'll be excited to start delegating and dispatching work to the proper people so that they can move on and up to the next thing.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. When I was in property management, I would always encourage people to, I guess, two routes, excel to their best, because there was always tasks that I wanted to remove, or duties, or things in which, were almost separate departments, which I were controlling, which I wanted to hand off and to provide them that opportunity. So whenever we'd bring on new staff, I'd say, think about you replacing yourself and bettering yourself, because the worst thing that'll happen, at least for me as a business owner, is that your skill set gets so high that maybe there is not a place at this company, but you've developed a skill set that you can go out to another company that does have that there. So I think it's, what I found effective is putting it in that framework for the individual. So one, that they feel empowered; two, that they're not restricted, because a lot of people feel that they top out. And if you're giving them that, that vision, that freedom of, hey, you continue to build these things, you're leveling yourself up, you're leveling those people up around you. The worst thing that comes from that is that you now have these amazing skill sets that you can bring to another career. The best thing possible for both parties is that our corporation, et cetera, gets bigger, and now these departments start to become relevant, and that there are these now new executive positions that can be created.
Yeah. I mean, I had a situation where, I think we got so good at leadership development that, and this is super rare from what I've seen in different industries, is the talent of our people outgrew our business. And so we got to the point where it was like, dude, I've got 4 guys that could be managers in any other store, and I need to go open another location. Otherwise I'm going to lose these people. Like I've built these people up, and they've now outgrown us as a business. And so it forced us to kind of push the vision in order to find those seats for them. And I think that's a good thing. I think that leadership development piece, I think, gets so overlooked. I would do some of the onboarding with guys when they first came on, and I would tell them, like, man, I'm not your direct manager. I'm not going to hold you accountable to your KPIs. I'm not going to ask you what those are, how you're doing on them. There's already a guy who's going to ask you those things. What I want to know is what's your secret sauce? What's the thing that makes you you? What's the thing that's, there's different guys, your unique ability, your differentiating factor, your specialty, whatever that thing is. I want to know what makes you tick. Because if we can figure that out, like to your point, Colin, you'll either go on to do bigger and better things than what we're doing here. And I think there's just a positive karma that'll come from that. Like, how highly will you speak of us? What kind of clients will you send to us? What kind of future employees will you send to us? Or we'll know exactly what to do with you and where to put you in our organization. And so one of the things I developed was we did an assessment where we were looking for strengths, weaknesses, likes, and dislikes. And it sounds really elementary, but I'm a big patterns guy. And so I would look for the patterns of what are the things that are strengths that are also likes, because that's probably pretty close to your gifting. But as a manager, I also want my managers to know what are the things that are strengths that you dislike, because those are the red flags. If I just know that you're good at it, I'm just going to keep giving you more of it. If I don't know that you dislike it, but I know that you're good at it. I'm just going to keep putting more of it on your plate. And slowly over time, you start to resent your job and not want to come to work. And then one day you quit and everybody's blindsided where they're like, but he was so good at this. I don't understand why. It's like, well, nobody took the time to ask him if they actually even liked it.
Right.
So I think there's a difference between being good at something versus liking something. And I think often we overlook that. And so recognizing that for your people, I mean, even how they want to be rewarded. Again, I was just having this conversation an hour ago where back in the day, I had two guys that were both incredibly high performers. They were both assistant managers, but one guy would rather have an extra, like if I were to do like a spiff or some kind of incentive on that day, one guy would rather have an extra $500,000. The other guy would rather have a day off. And it wasn't because the other guy was lazy or anything. They were both incredibly high performers, like would match each other. But one guy was more motivated by a little bit of extra cash, and the other guy was motivated by a little bit of a break.
Yeah.
And so knowing your people and knowing which one speaks to them more, like that stuff matters.
That's really good because I just drew it out. My assumption is you put it into a quadrant, right? Strengths, weaknesses, likes, dislikes, and you put it over there. So that's really interesting. So
what it can't, here's the caveat. So what happens a lot of times, especially with guys, when you ask them to list out their strengths, weaknesses, likes, and dislikes, if that list looks like it could be a TV guide, you need to go back to it and you need to put in some more examples and specifics. If it says sports, fishing, family time, like you got to come back to it and you got to be like, what specifically about that? Right? What's the feeling attached to that? What is it that you like about it? That's
so funny. I was at this retreat a week ago and this lady was a painter and she sells these, $20,000 in-home custom paintings, murals. And one of the guys was like, it was like a break and he wanted to paint something like that. This was a totally separate conversation. And, he's looking for some tips and we're like, oh, this lady knows some tips. She's like, yeah, that sounds like fun. How about let's do some accounting, guys? You guys want to do some accounting? She was basically giving that like similarity of like her painting is her job. So like, are you going to tell the CPA, let's go have some fun and let's go do some accounting. I want to go do my QuickBooks. So to your point, it may be a strength, but it might not be a like, or it might, need to find its certain scenario. Cause all of us were like, oh, painting, that's cool. When I was a kid, I'm going to color. And she was like, yeah, exactly. How about you as a CPA? Let's go do your books. And everybody got it right then. So yeah, that's unique because there's so many times that we see people that are really good at something and we just want to like bulldoze them, like, go get that. You're great at sales. You're great at this. You're great with people. And you don't realize that it's actually draining them. Like just sure they have those skills. Sure they're, but I don't know.
This is where I think there's a difference between a skill and a gift. So like you can be good at something. And the way I differentiate it is like, does it give you energy or does it drain your energy? So like a skill can be learned, can be taught. And so it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to give you energy. It could drain you. You can have a gift and that thing will fill you up, light you up where you could do it till 9:00 at night and you lose track of time. So, when I was doing a lot of hand-to-hand sales, I'm not a high energy, like extroverted type of person. And so I got good at the tactics and the influence and the persuasion and became a student of that and learned it all. But dude, 5 years in, I would come home after a 10-hour day and eat a pint of ice cream and go to bed.
Yes.
I was just drained.
I still do that.
And so it took time to realize like, oh, just because I'm good at this doesn't necessarily mean that I should be doing more of it.
I would have never guessed that you're bad at selling or bad with people. I think you're pretty dang smooth.
I know that I'm good at it, but I can only like
it's a skill. Today, it's not a gift.
Yeah, I'll be talked out, dude. I can't schedule much else today.
On the flip side of somebody doing something because they're good at it but they don't like it, I love how you honed in on just having that talk with the employee, because you may find out that they're passionate about doing something else that they're currently not doing. And we had a team member who has caught a lot of falling plates for us, and they've done a lot of things. But after just talking and figuring out exactly what they want to do, a lot of those plates were things that they don't mind doing. But there was a couple other items, managing, helping operate, different things that we had never really talked about before. And you could see the fire in them just kind of pick up because it was something they were passionate about. So it's not just, hey, this guy's good, let's just keep feeding it to him, and then all of a sudden he quits. That's certainly an issue. But it's also an issue if you just have somebody doing what they're there to do, in quotes, and you never really figure out exactly what they want to do.
Yeah. And there's also a reality, like, you have to have the conversation as well. If somebody really likes something or is interested in it, but they're not any good at it, like, that's called a hobby, right?
Yeah.
And this is a workplace.
That's a lot harder. That's a lot harder conversation.
I need you to be good at it, right? And so we have to put in some, this is where operations comes into play. It's like, we have to have some objective measurements of your performance so that we're not just having a subjective conversation around how much you like it or how good you think you are at it, but that we have some data and some objective measurements of how good are you at it.
That's important too.
That's very important, especially like as I got started in this business and, started getting some traction. A lot of people interviewed and were like, I love real estate. It's so much fun. It's so interesting, and gave me all the 1,000 reasons why they loved it. But I put in the practicality and the hours and the changing locks and the upset residents and the paperwork and the issues and, all those, nuances. And they're like, well, I don't necessarily like that. Weekends after hours, that's not fun. I like the whole concept of it. Concept is very different than the actual work that goes into actually doing the thing.
Yeah.
Well, I see this come out in investor relations, where a lot of times people will hire guys that are passionate about real estate and they want to work in that investor relations seat, but they don't know anything about persuasion, influence, and sales or networking. And it's like, well, I would rather you had that skill set and I could teach you about real estate, versus if you know about real estate, it's kind of an uphill battle to try to teach you all this other stuff. And so same thing happens there. You get, these young kids that are all gung ho, that don't own any real estate, but they're passionate about it or love it or want to. And they find themselves in that investor relations seat. And it's like, from a hiring perspective, I look at it like, trade-off. What thing am I willing to teach? And usually it's, what thing can I teach the fastest? I can teach you the context around real estate faster than I can teach you the context around sales, influence, and persuasion.
And that resonates because one of the things we utilize is culture index. I think it's the same as strength finders or, same concepts, but like you get to see what they're actually organically good at and then how they kind of think they should be at work. And because that's important, because when you're building a business, people have these things in their mind that they want to do, but it doesn't necessarily mean they're cut out for it. And back to the whole deadline, or that's actually one of the KPIs I wanted to say, but we're working with people now who really want to do A, B, and C, but they've had a long time to do A, B, and C, and A, B, and C still aren't done. So it's really a question of, is it the idea of it? Is there, what exactly is it? And the only way you're going to get through that whole difficult subjective conversation is just set deadlines and metrics and just say, get to here. If you're good at it, it'll get done. Be done by this time. If you're good at it, it'll get done. And I think you're pointing out failures in our leadership. So I appreciate that. Great having you on, Ian.
Yeah, no, it's something about the resistance too. Like if somebody's always late on their deadlines, I mean, some people do run late on most everything. Life. But typically if it's not getting done, they maybe love the topic and the things that go into it, but there's so much resistance in certain tasks or just the pieces of the doing that's why it's late, or that's why it's put together poorly. It's because that piece is a strong dislike, even though it may be a strength.
Yeah. So I got a tool for you guys that I use in this. So I call it the SHAC stack. So SHAC is an acronym that I came up with. It stands for skills, habits, attitude, capacity, and knowledge. And we want to elaborate on the first and last. So I want to elaborate on the skills and the knowledge that I need out of somebody in a particular position. And you can use this when you're hiring, where you can say like, this is the template. Like, this is what I'm looking for, is somebody that has this makeup. You can also use it in a progression plan, right? And then in a progression plan, I would also tie in like core values, because you may have like an entry level employee that's I work with a company. One of their core values is strength and unity. And they got 240 employees in the construction industry. And so they may hire a laborer. And when it comes to strength and unity, that guy might be a 2 out of 5. But it creates an objective measurement and a conversation to be able to say, hey, if you want to progress to become a foreman in our company are a 5 out of 5 in strength and unity. And so this is the area I need to see you improve on and get better at. Here's some examples where I didn't see it from you. Here's some examples of where I would like to see it for you. And then you can also create the blueprint of, using the same example. Hey, foremen in our company have these skills. They have this knowledge. They maintain this kind of attitude. They have this much capacity. They have these kind of habits. And so if you want to step into this role, this is the type of person you have to become. This is what you need to look like in order to fit that mold. And so it's a great tool to be able to kind of like objectively craft what are the skills and what are the specific, and with the skills and the knowledge, I always recommend rating them as well. Because you might have skills that it's like, they need to be able to do this. They need to be able to do this. They need to be able to do this. But like, this is the main piece they need to know how to do. And often it's stuff like prioritization. It's like they need to have the skill of prioritization to know what thing to tackle first, what thing to tackle second, right? They got to be able to create a list. That's the other thing we do when we do the org chart. We evaluate your people. Are they task people? Are they list people? Or are they list creators, right? List people are like project managers. Task people are just what it sounds like. They go do a task, but once they're done with it, they come back to you for, hey, what's the next task? And it could be a high level task, could be low level, but it's just like they cannot transition from one thing to the next without somebody helping bridge the gap. List people can make that transition, but you got to hand them the list. And then list creators are problem solvers who have mastered the skill of prioritization. And so they know how to move from one thing to the next, but they also know how to put them in the right order. And so if you can build a whole team of people that are list creators, it takes that off of you and the leadership team to have to constantly give that direction of, hey, this is what needs to be prioritized. Hey, this is actually what we should be focused on.
That's
like constant correction.
That's amazing. List creator. That is, you've now finally put into words the thing I'm looking for.
Well, there's somebody we were with yesterday for.
So I'm a very good list creator. I got a long list, very long list.
I'm thinking of somebody yesterday we were with who's really good at that. Just list creating, moving on to the next thing, helping delegate.
That sees what's in front of them. Yeah, you see the necessary items in front of them.
It's like the coach versus the player, right? Like the coach is going to have that bigger picture strategy, prioritization, and you want players on your team that can go out and execute, but the coach is going to create the playbook. They're going to create the scheme. They're going to be part of the strategy, right? And so like it's a different role in the business, but that's essentially what you want to try to create. I always say it comes back to us as the leaders in giving the destination for people and not just giving the next step.
Yeah.
So a lot of times people are just taught this because we just tell them what to go do rather than teaching them how to think. So I want to teach my people how to think. I don't want to teach them just what to do next. Because if I teach them what to do next, then once they're done with it,
task people,
or they hit a roadblock, they're just going to come to me for how do I get around this roadblock?
Yep.
So I think it was Stanford. They did a study where they had people walk into a room. They're like in the corner of a room and they said, hey, I want you to take, 10 steps in any direction. Just start walking, take 10 steps. So people would start walking and halfway across the room, they'd kick a chair in front of them. And every single person would either stop dead in their tracks or they would take like a 90-degree pivot and go in a different direction and end up somewhere different than where they had originally set out to. They did the same experiment, but the only thing they changed was instead of saying, hey, I want you to take 10 steps, they said, hey, I want you to end up in the opposite corner of the room. And so people would start walking, they kick a chair in front of them, and every single person either moved the chair, went up and over the chair, went around the chair, and they all ended up in the other corner of the room because they knew the destination. So when an obstacle came up, they were able to problem solve and get around it. Whereas the first group of people, they didn't know the destination. They just knew that they were supposed to be moving. And as soon as an obstacle got in their way, it was like, oh, dang, what do I do now? I guess I'll just stay put or I'll try and go over here. This is exactly what happens in the business. We get people that we tell them what to do. And then daily roadblocks get kicked in front of them, and they're like, what do I do here?
You got to explain the why, the intent.
For sure.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because I found myself doing that and guiding people underwriting or negotiating and stuff. It's like, it's easy for them to become task oriented, like you've said, because they think, hey, I just want to do this, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this. But they don't think about why they're doing it. If they can figure out why they're doing it, then if they hit a roadblock on item A, then they can figure out perhaps a way around that because they know that destination. I guess I just seriously repeated exactly what you just said, but I guess I'm saying that I've seen that live out in real life because it builds a relationship, I feel, between me and that person because it's less of a, hey, go to A, B, and C. It's more like, let's accomplish D. And to get there, you probably got to get through A, B, and C. But however the hell you take care of A, B, and C, we want to accomplish D. And I think explaining that really helps.
Yeah.
Yeah. This is a misnomer where people, they delegate like incorrectly. They think that they're delegating and they're just getting one task at a time off their plate instead of saying, no, I'm going to delegate this whole function. Or they misinterpret dispatching versus delegating. Like dispatching is making sure that we're assigning talent to task and that they're matched appropriately. Delegating is like buying back your time, right? But it's not really buying back your time if you delegate a task and the person has to come back to you to ask for the next task.
Yeah.
Like that's where resentment builds because you're like, I might as well just do it myself.
Yeah. I notice it so much now, like in coaching youth football, there's like the new kids and you can see the kids that are very task oriented that they know what to do. But to your point, you throw a chair in front of them, the whole play blows up. Then there's the kids, that have the list that can actually like have vision on the field that can see when something occurs, what the next 2-3 steps are, the difference between checkers and chess. And then obviously, there's the coaches or the true leaders of the team. The quarterback is typically one that can identify the field and then empower the individual who hopefully is a list person, a lineman who knows to go down his list, a nose guard's here, a tackle's here. Okay. We have linebackers back there. And it's not just the task of left foot first. It's like going down that list, but the list creator, once again, using this analogy of them being able to help move those and guide those individuals who then have these, additional topics, additional items that they can follow to get to that level. But it's funny. You see that, I mean, to your point, we're talking about automotive real estate, now all these different topics. It's really almost like a basic human skill of, to your point, pattern recognition. At first, you have no pattern recognition, so you're just doing the task. Once you have those pattern recognitions, you have the ability to do other things. Then it's seeing it at a larger scope. This is really good, man. I love it. Ian, I appreciate you being on, brother.
Dude, I appreciate you having me.
Yeah, man. We're gonna see you soon. How can everybody get a hold of you?
So I go by the RevOps Coach on Instagram, LinkedIn, the RevOpsCoach.com. The reason is because I approach operations with revenue in mind, not operations.
THEREVOPS.
Yep.
Okay.
Coach. And then my accelerator and the REI Boss program all live at myopsacademy.com.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I mean, for anybody out there interested, and we've talked about it, we'll probably talk about it more. You've helped some incredibly successful businesses become exponentially more successful. Like I've seen it in front of my eyes. These aren't, fly by night businesses. These are real businesses in multiple industries, not just real estate. So yeah, you're a stud, man. So kudos. And if anybody is listening, you are coming across issues, Ian has a lot to offer, and that's unsolicited, man. Cause, sincerely, like you've given me a ton of just, just advice and just, some counseling just cause, and I appreciate it. So yeah, you know what you're doing, and you provide a ton of value and help, business owners like me who are just trying to put out fires, actually, become a fire captain. So, and not just sitting there with a fire hose. So awesome, brother. Man. I appreciate you, man.
Yeah. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, of course, guys. I'm plagued by the fact that there is a better way. And so I always just look at like, man, where can we get better? Where can we improve? Where could we refine it? I'm not the startup guy. I'm the guy that works with people that have that runaway train that are like, man, this has momentum, but there is a better way. And I'm like, 100%. And I can find the needle in the haystack that's going to move the needle.